The story of the horse, considered by many to be the greatest South African champion of all, begins with trainer Sid Laird. In the mid-1950s, when Laird was coming to the end of his time as assistant to his uncle Sid Garrett, he was left in charge of Milnerton-based Roma Lodge when Garrett travelled to raid Natal with the stable's top horses. Among the horses left in his care was a small filly named Maritime, who had been bred by the Birch brothers. Maritime was not a particularly good racehorse, but endeared herself to Laird when through sheer guts and determination she won 2 races whilst under his care. When sent back to the Birches for stud duty, she was mated to one of their lesser sires, named White Horses. The resulting progeny was a colt named Top Gallant. In July of 1963, Sid Laird, now a successful trainer in his own right, claimed his second July victory with Colorado King, who had been bred by the Birch brothers and leased to Laird's patron, Pitt Lowe. An overseas offer to purchase Colorado King was too good to turn down, and consequently, Colorado King's lease agreement between Birch brothers and Mr. Lowe was terminated. Laird and Lowe were naturally very disappointed, so to make up for the situation, the Birch brothers offered them each the opportunity to pick for lease whatever horse they wanted from the farm. At this time, Top Gallant was proven to be one of the best up-and-coming horses in the country, and Sid Laird was all too aware that Maritime had recently produced a second colt by topsire Fairthorn. When the Birches' offer to lease was put on the table, Laird immediately said that he wanted the Maritime colt, who had already been earmarked for the Birches' biggest patron, Douglas Saunders.
Douglas Saunders used to come to the farm and I'll never forget as a youngster, listen to him and he'd say, "Ted, I want to see Courageous's foal and I want to see this one's foal and that one's foal and that one's foal." And he would only look at about, say, 8 yearlings, that's all. And then he'd say, "How much do you want for that one? How much do you want for that one? How much do you want for..." Now they're going to the yearling sales. I don't go to the yearling sales. I'll never forget as a kid, and I used to listen to all this. I don't go to the yearling sales. How much do you want for that horse now? And he'd come and he'd sign the check. And he said, "All right, you send them up to Fred Rickaby. Don't make them fat and don't prepare them for any sale. You just do exactly what you're doing now." And that's how he was so successful too. Helped those horses. They were never overweight.
One man's loss was another man's gain, and Douglas Saunders, along with his trainer Fred Rickaby, lost out on Maritime's second colt. But they would, some 4 years later, play a further part in his story, which would unfold as the most dramatic and perhaps poetic in the history of the South African turf. Despite being by the good-looking and robust Fairthorn, SeaCottage was a light-framed and effeminate type of horse who was far from conformationally correct. His major asset was a superb action and a devastating turn of foot, which he demonstrated the first time he set foot on a racecourse in December of 1964, with jockey Robbie Sivright in the irons.
There were 2 horses in the race, and one was Red Cap and the other one was SeaCottage. And Red Cap was in the stable, was the number 1 horse. We thought he was going to be the champion. So Sydney put Robert on SeaCottage, and I went to him and I said, "I don't think that's fair. Robert is your stable jockey, and yet you put him on the horse that's the least fancied." And of course, Sydney said to him, "Mind your own business." Anyway, come race day, and I'm standing there on the stand and waiting for this Red Cap to win and SeaCottage to run nowhere, and the next thing SeaCottage comes to the front and wins, and Sydney turns to me and says, "Now you know why." And from that day, Robert had sort of, I don't know, he bonded with that horse, and he used to go to the stables and he always called him Joe. He'd go and say, "Morning, Joe. How are you, Joe?" And that horse knew Robert.
Sivright would go on to partner SeaCottage in all but one of his 24 starts.
Although being a slight horse, he wasn't a small horse, but he was slight. Dad said he used to eat more than any other horse he's had. He would eat a good helping of food, and he had a lot of energy, but he had a terrific action. He had a very big stride, and I remember speaking to Robbie Sivright. He says most horses will have 400 meter run in where they can run at their absolute maximum, but SeaCottage could actually keep up his top speed for 600 meters, which is phenomenal.
In his second race at Kenilworth, SeaCottage was ridden by Bert Abercrombie, who was deputising for an injured Robbie Sivrite. Sid Laird wanted to keep SeaCottage's phenomenal talent hidden from the bookmakers and told Abercrombie to give him an easy run. In the race, Abercrombie battled to get the colt to focus and gave him a smack on the shoulder. The response was so instant and powerful that Abercrombie nearly fell off the back. In a matter of strides, SeaCottage cut through the field and pulled away by 5 lengths. Despite having won, Sid Laird was furious at Abercrombie for exposing his champion.
Riding work for Sydney Laird, he asked me to ride him. He was such an easy horse, a quiet horse. If you trotted him up to go to work, it would take you 5 minutes to get there because you used to have to stop and look at the plane and the birds and the bees and everything. And you got onto the track, all you did was drop your hands and he would just canter down. He was the easiest of horses a child could have ridden him. He was such a quiet horse and such a laid-back type of horse that if you were trotting him up to the track, if there was a matchstick, he'd trip over it like he was clumsy. But the moment you got onto the track, he was just collected. But he didn't pull, he didn't overexert himself. He would just go and do what you wanted him to do. If you just gave him a little one click, it was like an automatic motor car, like driving a Rolls Royce, I would think.
Well, I think my dad felt that SeaCottage was one of his children. He loved SeaCottage. He said it was like driving a sports car. You know, whenever he asked for something, he gave, and he gave more.
He was a total athlete, and it was reputed that when he was in peak fitness, an average horse's heartbeat is about 40 beats per minute, and his had dropped to about 26 beats per minute.
SeaCottage finished his 2-year-old career as a winner of 5 races from as many starts. From early on in their partnership, it was evident that Bob and Joe took their laid-back natures into their races, where they were perfectly content to switch off at the back of the field. And this became their signature style of running.
I think Robbie's route was always the safest. You could always get out and get a run.
As they settled down, it was Gaskell who went out to make the pace. So it's Gaskell in blinkers from Renounce, Fairmountain, Etty Perce, Pullman, Tuan, SeaCottage lying 7th, Java Head, and Speciality.
Gaskell was probably the fastest miler in the country. And of course, Renounce had this phenomenal speed as well. And they were way ahead of us.
Then comes Tuan, SeaCottage is lying 7th, at the back Java Head and Speciality is back marker.
I think, what used to happen, they used to just drop him out, stay out of the sort of scrummage up the front, just tuck him at the back and invariably on the outside so he could get this electrifying burst of his gain. So this was Robbie's plan, always to come on the outside.
Must be a full 10 lengths behind the field.
To watch SeaCottage running in a race was heartbreaking because you think, oh my goodness, there's no ways he can get anywhere close, you know.
And I heard a noise behind me, and I looked to my right, over my shoulder, and I saw SeaCottage, Robert Sivrite on SeaCottage. I said, Robert, what are you doing? How far back are you? And he let him go.
Sivrite coming into the straight would say, come on, boy, let's go. And he'd go, chup, chup. And then SeaCottage would lengthen his stride, and it looked so easy. It looked like the other horses were standing still, you know. It's quite amazing to watch.
Now there's SeaCottage, 3rd from the outside, coming through the gap between Java Head and Fairmountain. Now watch him accelerate.
By the time the Natal racing season rolled in the early winter of 1966, SeaCottage had notched up 9 victories, 3 of them at Grade 1 level. His only defeat to date had been in the Cape Guineas, in which he was nursing a foot injury sustained in a training gallop and in which he ran 4th. His major wins included the Champion Nursery, the Queen's Plate and the Cape Derby over distances ranging from 1,000 metres to 2,400 metres. Already the name SeaCottage was being spoken amongst racing men in revered terms.
He had no distance. He could win from 1,000 metres to 2,000 metres. That's a sign of a great horse.
South Africa in the 1960s was a country ruled by fear and oppression. Horse racing was the only form of gambling that the doctrinal apartheid government deemed legal. And just as prohibition in the States had given rise to bootleggers, so too did the apartheid regime's draconian anti-gambling laws give rise to underground betting shops, or joints as they were more commonly called.
Gambling joints were illegal. There was no such thing as casinos. Everything was backyard stuff, you know. Sid Laird and myself, we loved gambling. All sorts of gambling. You know, we used to, when we finished training our horses, we'd go straight to the club and start playing. Naturally, we were taking the chance because they used to raid these places. But he was a victim for gambling.
One of their favourite haunts was the Monaco Club in Durban.
It was a snooker club in front, and in the back, that's where the gambling was going on.
The establishment was run by Monty Labuschagne.
He was sort of a gangster type of bloke. He didn't do anything himself. He had bouncers, and Johnny Nell used to work for him. It was one of his henchmen, and he was a noted gunman. One night, the fellas there started having a bit of a go at him, jokingly.
Hey, Mr. Big Man with your toy gun.
The one bloke said, "Look at that on the wall."
See that cockroach? Shoot it.
You want to see how good I am with this thing?
You don't know if he hit the cockroach. This is the type of bloke he was.
Across the road from the steel-gated Monaco Club was the Natal Tattersall's, the legal gambling headquarters of the Natal bookmakers, and the man who ran the biggest operation from Tattersall's was British-born Sonny Chislett, whose slogan was, "No bet, too big."
Fellas used to go to Tattersall's and then walk across the Monaco Club, and who used to come in was Sonny Chislett, and he used to play cards, and he was matey with Monty Labuschagne.
By mid-May of 1966, SeaCottage was already being priced up by the bookmakers as the early favourite for the Rothmans' July Handicap. His route to the big race would see him run in the 1,200-metre Newbury Stakes and then the 1,600 metres South African Guineas. A few days before the Newbury, Sid Laird paid Sonny Chislett a visit and placed the biggest bet of his life with the bookmaker, a 10,000 rand all to come on SeaCottage to win all three races, an accumulative bet that multiplied by the odds of the horse over each race. If the horse managed to win all three races, Sid Laird would win a fortune.
It's a fool's bet, Sid.
In those days it was betting that counted, you know, because there wasn't much in training. The stakes weren't like what they are today.
On May the 28th, 1966, SeaCottage lined up to contest the weight for age Newbury Stakes over 1,200 metres. His last start had been the Cape Derby over twice the distance, and many pundits felt that a sprint would be too hot for him to handle. Given his style of running, the bookmakers felt he could not win, and hence he started at generous odds of 6-1. This suited Laird perfectly. In a remarkable display, he showed blistering pace, crossing the line in first place, beating the favourite William Penn by 2.5 lengths, breaking the course record in the process. Sonny Chislett felt the first twinge of anxiety. If SeaCottage was to be beaten, putting Laird out of his bet, this is where it should have happened. Just 1 week later, the Wonder Horse, as the press were now calling him, returned to Greyville for the South African Guineas. The race was contested over a mile, a distance far more to the cottager's liking. True to form, he won easily, beating second-placed Refinery by 3.5 lengths.
Drama entered the July story when, as SeaCottage was returning from an early morning training session, an unknown person fired a bullet into his right hindquarters.
I was on the beach the morning he was shot. It was approximately about 6:30 in the morning. I saw people running down the beach, trainers and grooms and jockeys, and they were all shouting and screaming. Then they got to me and they said, "SeaCottage has just been shot."
This horse had done very, very well up to then, but now he's favourite for the July, and there's lots of people that didn't want him to win. So they, of course, plotted this horrific scheme to try and stop him from running.
We got a phone call very early in the morning. Robert was getting ready to go and ride work, And it was Sydney saying that SeaCottage had been shot.
All betting was suspended as veterinary surgeons examined SeaCottage and X-ray plates were taken in an effort to find the bullet.
We rushed to the stables and the horse was there, very distressed. And of course he was limping slightly because it must have been painful.
He was in the box with the horse, Robert was. He was in tears, just hanging on to SeaCottage's neck and saying, "Don't worry, my boy, it'll come right, my boy. Don't worry, my boy, you're not going to die."
So then we had guards and we had the vets, and they came with X-ray machines to see if the bullet was there, and then they wanted to cut it out, and Sydney says, "Under no circumstances are you cutting my horse."
They couldn't find the bullet with the X-rays because it was so deep in the rump. And they also discovered that he had been shot while walking under the bridge at the Blue Lagoon.
He would have come through here, and in this vicinity, Johnny Nell was above, and he leant over this shelf here, and close to the horse's rump, and he said that he shot the horse exactly where he wanted to shoot him. He didn't really want to hurt him and go into the bone or anything. He wanted to shoot him in the flesh. And that's exactly where the bullet was lodged.
Although Johnny Nell had picked the perfect spot to shoot the horse, his choice of getaway car could not be described as inconspicuous.
It was a car that you couldn't miss. One of those American cars, a two-door sports car, very flash, sort of a motor car.
As Nell took aim at SeaCottage, an Indian bicycle messenger named Dorsami Govender was cycling across the bridge and took a moment to appreciate Nell's distinctive vehicle.
And the next minute he heard a shot. And he looked and there was Johnny Nell leaning over the bridge.
Worried that the culprit might come back to finish the job, the stable took extra precautions to protect SeaCottage.
Sydney got a friend of his to put metal plates over the air vents on the outside of the box, which faces the railway line there, because he said somebody might throw a snake in there.
But Johnny Nell would not be returning to finish the job. The police, having spoken to the Indian messenger, already had a description of the getaway car and knew exactly who it belonged to. It was only a matter of time before Johnny Nell would be in police custody.
The police were called in and within 24 hours arrested a man who is alleged to have fired at the horse. High praise indeed for the Durban Murder and Robbery Squad for their swift action.
Within a few days, SeaCottage's soundness was tested. Sid Laird was adamant that the horse could run and even win.
Now Sid was desperate to run the horse. He said, I'm going to win more money than I'd ever have in my life. That's why Chislett was in so much trouble. You know, the horse at that stage was 15-10 favourite. And most of the money was coming from Sid Laird.
Chislett had turned to his friend Monty Labuschagne, who owed him a lot of money in unpaid gambling debts. A deal was struck. If Monty could take care of the problem, Chislett would erase all his debts, as well as pay him 20% of his profits for that season.
Chislett said to him, listen, get the horse out the race.
I stand to lose an independent fortune.
I can get the horse out the race.
The winning stake for the 1966 July was 27,000 rand. Sid Laird stood to win 7 times that amount on his bet alone. If SeaCottage was scratched from the race, Laird would get nothing. And because at that time there were no refunds on bets when horses were scratched, he would also lose the 10,000 that he spent on the bet. Ironically, the same amount that was promised to Johnny Nell for shooting Laird's horse.
Oh, he was very angry, you know. He was entitled to be. Who ever expects anyone to shoot a horse?
The whole country was absolutely shocked. The letters that little children wrote, how it affected the whole nation. That people can do things like this for money and harm an animal that was so much loved.
The outpouring of emotion over the incident was unprecedented. Whilst some fans were saddened by the event and prayed for SeaCottage's recovery, others were very angry over the prospect of losing their money if the horse was scratched. Marlene Laird spent days going through the hundreds of cards that arrived at the Laird household. One weightier envelope caught her attention. Opening it, Marlene found a replica of the Victoria Cross with an engraving that read, "SeaCottage, for courage." Although the note was unsigned, it is thought that it was sent by the family of the famed pilot Edwin Swales, who posthumously received the VC after he was killed in the Second World War. From then on, SeaCottage would run all his races with the VC pinned to his saddlecloth.
SeaCottage, the Durban July favourite who was shot in his right hindquarters, arrives for a gallop trial at Greyville. This is his first real test, and trainer Sid Laird personally saddles him.
Sid Laird, he had funny sayings. He says he can beat him on 3 legs. That was one of the things he said. I said, yeah. I said, he said, what do you think? I said, well, Sid, it's up to you. I mean, in my heart, I wouldn't have run him.
But the vets went along with him and he said, no, he's going to run.
From the very beginning, he was determined to get him there. He never doubted the fact that he could.
There's more than the usual number of racing men present for this important run of SeaCottage, who carries his big race jockey, Bobby Sybarite. All eyes are focused on the Wonder Horse, nearest camera, as he gallops home from the 6 furlong mark. Although not going at his fastest, SeaCottage put up a good run. The big question is, how will his injured leg stand up to the 10.5 furlongs of the Durban July handicap?
It would be no easy task, as he would be facing the likes of the 1965 winner King Willow, as well as superstar filly Renounce, and his very highly rated stable companion Java Head. But the nation's hopes and sentiment remained with the Wonder Horse.
Number 4 is the Wonder Horse SeaCottage, favourite at 5-2. And the question on everybody's lips is, how will his injury stand up to the gruelling 10.5 furlongs?
The nerves were just so frazzled and so tight, you just couldn't think anymore. You were just praying that all will go well and that it would have a happy ending.
And the moment the whole of South Africa is waiting for arrives as the field comes under starters' orders, and they're off, with Nightjar on the inside, followed by King Willow, Ajax, Far Eyes and Renounce, and on the outside Highland Chief. Well back is SeaCottage and Java Head. At the 7 furlong mark, it's Fair Sun well in the lead, then King Willow, Highland Chief, Far Eyes, Ajax, Nightjar, Rose Knight, with SeaCottage and Java Head still far behind.
I attended that July in 1966. I was underage, really. I shouldn't have been there. And I remember that horse coming through the field, despite the fact that he was out of condition, not fit, not ready for the race, coming through the field with his characteristic finish. And there was this incredible wave of emotion in that crowd when they believed that he was going to win.